I've been talking the last couple of days, setting up what I want to talk about today, which is the proof or proofs advanced by the Christian thinker Thomas Aquinas, philosopher, theologian. These are his 5 proofs for the existence of God. My text here is this work, Penguin Classics, Thomas Aquinas' Selected Writings. Aquinas believed that God's existence could be proved in 5 separate ways. And I'll touch on these ways very briefly, but I want to really focus on one way. Each of the 5 ways is dealt with a considerable degree of nuance and sophistication. I can't do full justice to all 5, so I'm going to really focus on one. Now, Aquinas' first proof is based on motion or change. Essentially, Aquinas argues that change is caused by something else that makes the change happen. And we see the change all around us in the world. Things change. But Aquinas says ultimately there has to be something that moves the whole system that is not itself changed or even changeable. And that something is God. This is the proof from motion or change, and I'm going to come back to it. The second proof that Aquinas advances is from cause. That when we see effects, we can derive from them causes. Now, when you see one thing, it's caused by something else, but then that's got to be caused by something also. And so you keep going back and back and back, and Aquinas' point is you can't keep going infinitely back. We'll come back to why that is the case. But there has to be, Aquinas says, a first cause that is, in a sense, getting the system of causation into motion in the first place. And that, Aquinas says, is God. The third proof is from perishability. Or contingency. Basically, everything in the world that exists is contingent. And by contingent, we mean it doesn't have to exist. In fact, it's not likely to keep existing. Things come into existence and go out of existence. But Aquinas says that this whole system of popping in and out of existence depends upon a necessary being that must exist. And this necessary being is God. The fourth proof is from perfection or degree. Things have in the world greater or lesser degrees of perfection. Aquinas argues that when you have a kind of spectrum, a continuum of perfection like this in the world, perfection and imperfection, there has to be a perfect being that, in a sense, sets the standard. The being upon whom all these lesser forms of perfection depend, and that being is God. And the final proof is from order and purpose. Aquinas says that if you look around the world shows all kinds of signs of order and purpose, of a kind of devising intelligence that, in a sense, has orchestrated the whole system, keeps it in place, a kind of author, if you will, of the text. And Aquinas argues that this has to be, and in fact, is what we call God. So 5 separate proofs, I think, working together, a very powerful kind of phalanx of arguments. But I want to zoom into the first one, just the argument from change or motion. Now, when we think of motion, we think of kind of moving from here to there. But the Latin word that Aquinas uses is modus. And modus actually doesn't mean just motion. Modus means a change. Aquinas, in fact, drawing on Aristotle, lists 3 different kinds of modus or change. First, changes in quality. Second, changes in quantity. And third, changes in place or location. So let's look at a couple of examples of what I mean. What's a change in quality? Well, a change in quality would be, for example, if I am extremely hot, and then I become extremely cold. There's a change in what I'm experiencing. It goes from one thing to another. There's a change in quality, in this case, the quality of the temperature. But that is a kind of modus, a kind of change. The second would be if you take a guy who's really thin and he eats a lot of food and he becomes really huge. He becomes obese, he becomes fat. Well, that's a change in quantity. You have the same individual who used to be, 140 pounds, and now he's 280 pounds. That's a change in quantity. Or if you take you or me, and here we are in, let's say, Texas, and we want to go to Chicago, that's a change in location or in place. Now, that's the only one that we would call motion, but modus, the Latin term, covers all three types of change. Now, The point that Aquinas makes here is this, and that is that motion or change is always brought about by something else. And so, for example, if you say, let's just take, for example, water. Water is cold, and water becomes very hot. That is caused by the heat that is added to the water that makes it hot. Or if you take a guy who's 140 pounds, he becomes 280 pounds, that's because of the food that he ate that, in a sense, enlarged his body and caused the change. Or if I'm going to go from Texas to Chicago, that's because of the car or the airplane that took me from here to there. And therefore, these changes, Aquinas is showing, are brought about by some other thing that is separate from the thing being changed. Now, the deep point that Aquinas raises is that if one thing is caused by another, and that thing is caused by another thing, is it possible to have an infinite series of causes like this? The motion of X being produced by Y, which is produced by Z, which is produced by A, which is produced by B, and can you go on forever like this? And Aquinas basically says, no, you can't. An infinite regress like this is not possible. And he gives, I think, a very profound reason why. Now, to understand his reason, you should think somewhat like this. Think about a kid, for example, who is pushed or shoved and comes flying forward, and the teacher grabs the kid and goes, "Why'd you do that?" And the kid goes, "Well, I didn't do that. The kid behind me pushed me." And the teacher goes up to that kid and goes, "Well, why'd you do that?" And that kid goes, "Well, no, I didn't do that. I was pushed forward myself. The kid behind me pushed me." And the teacher goes, "Oh, wow, let me go to that kid." And that kid says the same thing. "The kid behind me pushed me." Now here's Aquinas' question. Can you keep going forever back like that? And his answer is obviously not, because somebody had to be the first pusher. If the first kid didn't push the second kid could not have pushed the third kid, who could not have pushed the fourth kid. So in order for the series to get started, somebody had to be the first mover. And this is really Aquinas' point. Aquinas basically argues that when we look at the motion and change in the universe, change that is occurring constantly, it's almost a defining feature of our universe, this change points to, unmistakably, logically, points to an unchanged mover, a first mover, and, says Aquinas, that mover we call God.